The thing about rivers at night is that they don't feel like water anymore. They feel like a living thing breathing in the dark. And that's exactly where my story begins. I'm 40 years old now, but when this happened I had already spent nearly 15 years working as a river guide. My name's Daniel Mercer, and most of my life has been spent steering rafts through wild water for tourists who want a little taste of danger before heading back to comfortable hotels. I worked along a remote stretch of river cutting through dense jungle in northern Australia. The place was beautiful in the daytime, emerald water sliding between black stone cliffs, mangrove roots gripping the banks like twisted fingers, birds screaming overhead. But at night, the whole place changed. That river belonged to something else after dark. Most guides refused to run night trips out there, but our company offered a special moonlight rafting tour for small groups. It wasn't whitewater rafting exactly, more like drifting slowly down the calm sections while people listened to jungle sounds and watched the moonlight shimmer on the water. It was quiet, eerie, and tourists loved it. But anyone who grows up around rivers in Australia knows something important. If you can't see the surface clearly, assume something underneath can see you. Saltwater crocodiles lived all along that river system. Massive ones. Some pushing 16 or 17 feet. They didn't usually bother rafts because they prefer ambushing animals at the edge of the water, not chasing things in the middle. At least, that's what we always told ourselves. The night it happened was humid enough that the air felt thick in my lungs. Even the insects sounded tired. I remember the smell of wet leaves and mud drifting off the banks while we prepared the raft. My group that evening was small, 4 tourists from Germany and 1 local wildlife photographer who had come along to capture night shots of the jungle. Before we pushed off, I gave the usual speech. Stay seated. Keep your hands inside the raft. Don't splash the water. And most importantly, if I tell you to stay quiet, you stay quiet. They all nodded with those half-excited smiles tourists get when they think the danger is mostly just part of the show. The moon was almost full when we launched. Its reflection stretched across the river like a silver road. The jungle on both sides stood thick and black, the kind of darkness where your eyes keep trying to invent shapes that aren't there. For the first hour everything was peaceful. The raft glided along slow current while I steered gently with a paddle at the back. Frogs croaked from the banks. Somewhere deep in the trees a fruit bat screeched. Occasionally we heard the distant splash of fish breaking the surface. The tourists whispered to each other, pointing cameras into the darkness. Then we reached a narrow section of the river where the mangroves leaned out over the water. I knew this part well. Crocodiles liked to rest along those muddy banks because the roots gave them perfect cover. I slowed the raft and lowered my voice. All right, I told them quietly, this is crocodile territory. If we're lucky we might see some eyes shining on the bank. People always think that sounds exciting. Until they actually see the eyes. We drifted silently for several minutes. The river had gone strangely still there. Even the frogs seemed quieter. The only sound was the soft slap of water against the raft. Then the photographer sitting near the front whispered, "Guide. Look." I followed the direction of his finger. 2 small red reflections floated just above the waterline on the right bank. Crocodile eyes. They looked like glowing embers hovering in the darkness. Probably a small one, I murmured. But I kept watching. The eyes didn't move. They just stared. Anyone who works around crocodiles knows that when you can only see the eyes, you're looking at maybe 10% of the animal. The raft drifted closer. My stomach tightened slightly, but I stayed calm. I'd seen hundreds of crocs over the years. Then something changed. The eyes disappeared. No splash. No movement. Just gone. And suddenly the water around the raft felt a little too quiet. I gently pushed my paddle into the river to guide us away from the bank when I heard a sound behind me. A slow swirl. Not a splash. More like something enormous rolling under the surface. I turned my head. And that's when the river exploded. The crocodile hit the raft from the side with a force that felt like a car crash. Water blasted into the air. The raft lurched violently, throwing one of the tourists sideways. Someone screamed. And then I saw it. The crocodile's head rose out of the water right beside me. It was huge. Bigger than any croc I had ever seen that close. Its jaws snapped open, revealing rows of yellow teeth that looked like broken knives. The smell hit me immediately, rotten meat and swamp water. The animal slammed its body against the raft again. The impact knocked me off balance and my paddle flew from my hands into the river. One of the tourists started shouting in panic. "Stay still!" I yelled. But fear doesn't listen to instructions. The crocodile lunged. Its jaws clamped onto the side rope of the raft, teeth punching through the thick material. For a second the entire raft tilted toward the water as the animal twisted. And if you know anything about crocodiles, you know what comes next. The death roll. The croc began spinning violently. The raft jerked sideways, dragging toward the water. One of the tourists slipped and half his body went over the edge. Adrenaline hit my system like fire. If the raft flipped, we were done. Crocodiles don't chase rafts often. But people thrashing in the water? That's exactly what they wait for. I lunged forward and grabbed the emergency pole strapped to the side of the raft, a long aluminum push rod we used in shallow areas. The crocodile's head was still above water, jaws locked onto the rope as it thrashed. I jammed the metal pole straight into its mouth. Hard. The croc reacted instantly, releasing the rope and snapping at the pole with a thunderous crack. The sound echoed across the river like gunfire. "Paddle! Paddle now!" I shouted. The remaining tourists grabbed paddles and began digging into the water with frantic strokes. But the crocodile wasn't finished. The water beside us erupted again. Its massive tail slammed into the raft. The force knocked me sideways and I nearly fell into the river. Cold water splashed over my legs and for one terrifying second my hand dipped beneath the surface. I yanked it back like the water was electric. Behind us the croc surfaced again. And this time I saw its full length in the moonlight. At least 15 feet. Maybe more. The animal surged forward with terrifying speed, jaws opening again. My mind was racing. You can't outrun a crocodile in water for long. Their first attack is the ambush. But if they decide to continue, they're unbelievably fast. Then I remembered something. Crocodiles rely heavily on surprise and directional control. If you create chaos in the water, sometimes it disrupts their attack long enough to escape. Everyone paddle left. I shouted suddenly. They obeyed instantly. The raft spun sharply in the water just as the crocodile lunged again. Its jaws slammed into empty water where the raft had been seconds earlier. The animal surfaced beside us, thrashing. I grabbed a flashlight from my vest and aimed the beam directly into its eyes. Bright light can disorient crocodiles temporarily at night. The beam caught its pupils and the croc hesitated for just a second. That second saved us. "Go!" I roared. Everyone paddled like their lives depended on it. Because they did. The raft shot downriver with the current while the crocodile churned behind us. For several seconds I thought it might still follow. But eventually the splashing stopped. The river grew quiet again. None of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was our breathing, ragged, shaky, and loud in the darkness. We drifted another mile before I finally let the raft slow down. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the paddle. One of the tourists whispered, Was that normal? I let out a long breath and looked back at the dark water behind us. No, I said quietly. That was a hunting attempt. We reached the launch point about 30 minutes later. Everyone climbed out in silence, still pale from what had happened. I sat on the edge of the raft for a while, staring at the river. That night taught me something important about survival. Nature doesn't hate you. It doesn't hunt you out of anger. But it also doesn't care if you live or die. That crocodile wasn't evil. It was just doing what it had evolved to do for millions of years. The lesson I carry with me now is simple. Out in the wild, confidence can keep you calm. But respect keeps you alive. And ever since that night, whenever I guide a raft through dark water, I remember something I tell every group before we launch. If the river suddenly goes quiet, pay attention. Because something underneath might already be watching you.